One of the most remarkable aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is its unique history. Throughout the world, great stories from faithful church members have only added to that history. This program shares some of these incredible stories of faith, perseverance, hope, and inspiration. You're listening to Legacy. I'm your host, Nathan Wright.
I'm Matt Henderson, filling in for Nathan Wright. Temple Square in Salt Lake City is one of the country's top tourist attractions, and anyone who has visited this 10-acre square has been impressed by the beauty of the gardens in the summer or its Christmas displays in the winter. With me in studio today to talk about Temple Square and its gardens are Peter Lasig and Esther Truitt Henriksen. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's start off by just having each of you introduce yourself briefly. Tell us about your background, and especially you, Peter, what you did with Temple Square. So let's start with you.
I'm Peter Lasig, and I had the great honor and privilege of serving at the gardens at Temple Square for about 45 years. 33 of those years were as the supervisor of the grounds.
45 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Esther.
And I am Esther Truitt Henriksen, and I started at Temple Square at age 19. Peter hired me as the first woman to ever work on the grounds, and I pulled weeds at the Beehive House, and then went to Utah State and got a bachelor's, and to the University of Connecticut and got a master's in landscape history, and then came and worked full-time for a number of years.
So a master's degree in landscape history. Tell me briefly what that entails.
Well, a lot of people think it's that you go to like a church historic site and tell them what kind of tree to plant or what kind of fence, and it is that as well, but it is also documenting changes in the landscape that occur now, that occur all the time, and to know what things have been like in the past, even the ancient past.
So could you tell us a little bit about the Salt Lake Valley, what it was like early on?
When the Saints came?
Yeah.
Well, in 1847, when the Saints came into the valley, it was there are accounts of they had to be on top of their horses, and they had to sort of rise up in the saddle to see over the tall grass. Mm. There is talk of just one tree in the valley, and that was a juniper that was sort of off in the distance. There, we know that area is about 6 south and 6th east and 3rd south.
3rd south.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I remember seeing that monument there.
But that's actually not the place. It's actually the florist that's across the street from that monument. That's where that tree was. But it was there were lots of creeks and streams that came out of the canyons, and they were lined with poplars. So there were lots of trees in the valley. So
let's move into the Temple Square. Now, 45 years. So what year was that you started working?
Let me see. I started in 56.
In 56. And you worked, who was the supervisor of the grounds at that time?
A grand nobleman named Irvin T. Nelson.
Irvin T. Nelson. Now, if I remember right, he designed for other temples. Did he do the London Temple?
He was very active in a lot of theaters. If it concerned gardens, he was the man. He, I think he started by organizing. He was a tremendous organizer, and I think it was right after the Depression when he started making an impact on the church gardens. He started with the various chapels and organized a beautification program for the various chapels. He went all over the state, improving the gardens at various chapels. And then I think he got his break at what is that place? The winter quarters. He got his break at winter quarters when, actually, before then. He graduated.
From Weber State, wasn't it?
What?
Did he graduate Weber
Yes.
State? Yeah.
Good for you. He graduated from Weber State, valedictorian.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time he gave his valedictory address, when it was finished, the president of Weber State, which was David O. McKay, who later became the president of the church, leaned over to someone and said, "That was a wonderful talk. I wonder if he wrote that himself."
It's funny.
So that was a measure of how Brother Nelson began to develop a respect and a rapport with David O. McKay, and they worked together on many projects. I remember when I was on board in '56, shortly after I was hired, he was sent by President McKay to go to the Swiss temple and supervise the landscaping there. He conceived the landscape, and then he also supervised. He was just wonderful at supervising. Later on, he was sent to the London temple, and he designed and supervised the landscaping there. And then he went to the New Zealand temple and so forth. St. George Temple also received his touch. He was just it was a very inspirational experience for me to work with him. And my father told me when I was getting to know Brother Nelson, he said, "You pay attention to that man. He's worth more than a college education."
Wow.
And that sure turned out to be true. When I meet him in heaven, I'd like to talk over a few things with him, because he really gave me a wonderful boost intellectually and spiritually. Just a marvelous man.
Now, looking at photos of Temple Square, I'm not certain, but it looks to me like the layout of Temple Square Gardens changed late 40s, early
That's
50s.
true. In
Something
1944, he took over.
like that. And he's the one that changed the whole
Yes,
kind of
Brother
layout.
Naumann, who was the gardener before him, supervised by walking around in a nice, stiffly starched white shirt. And Brother Nelson, during this entire time, was beautifying temples and church historic sites. And then Brother Naumann had a heart attack and died. And President McKay just turned it over to Brother Nelson right there, and that started his life's work.
When I walk through Temple Square now, I'm no gardener, but I can certainly appreciate it. One thing that I notice is I look at the shadows from the trees coming down and on the pavement and so on, and then I look at the flower beds, and they have kind of the same feel, that same pattern.
You really have done your homework. Esther and I conceived of the idea of producing Technicolor blotched shadows across the flower beds that were in the center mall there, that replicated in color what you could see in black and white with the blotchy shadows, and the arrangements were done to support, not take over, the view provided by the historic buildings.
So let's talk about that. How do you create a flower bed? Let's talk about a flower bed. How do you create a flower bed that has that look to it?
That's an interesting question. I think that the way that we created flower beds was to simply look at the shadows and the blotchy pieces of sunlight, the shards of sunlight that splayed across the garden. We would look at them with squinty eyes. When you squint your eyes, I got this from Brother Nelson, who got it from the English when he was in London, doing the London Temple. You squint your eyes so you can hardly see, and that allows you to see only the most important issues. The basic structural organization of the space can be visualized that way. And having picked up the feeling of the blotching, the black and white blotchiness of the shadows as they moved across the garden through the day, it was a simple matter to, once having tuned into that, The Japanese gardeners do this also. Many great landscapers have developed the idea of squinting to rule out the superfluous so that we can see only the important. And having done that, you tune into the spirit of the place, or what some people call the genius loci. Is that how you pronounce it?
Correct.
Yeah, genius loci, the spirit of the place. We started there, and then as we had opportunity to re-landscape because of construction or excavation or something like that, we would squint and tune into the spirit of the place, the genius loci, before we began to create the new garden. And it was dependent on the character that already existed in the place. The character around the Salt Lake Temple was of majesty and somber elegance. The character of the Mormon Tabernacle was Brigham Young pragmatic aluminum roofs.
Right.
And then the character of the Assembly Hall was this charming bit of English architecture that was kind of, what, Victorian? Would you call that Victorian?
It's kind of modified Gothic.
Okay, I like that, modified Gothic. However, it wasn't Gothic. It was
Right.
cheerful Gothic.
Cheerful Gothic.
It had no malice. It was a quality of innocence that was there. And yet, over at the Beehive House, that was kind of like a patchwork quilt that would be done by English saints.
Mm-hmm.
It was an English garden. Well, actually, Esther would know more about it, but some of my pictures that I looked at when we tried to decide how to landscape that were fairly shocking. It was swept earth and bushes.
Really?
Well, with all those kids running around and not very much garden, it was just swept earth. You could never clean it because it was just dirt. Then you had the bushes and...
Well, and now with the Lion House area, you've got all these wedding parties in there. So
Yes.
how do you keep a garden looking nice with all those hundreds of people every week?
Well, that was a strategy that was born of work that had been done in golfing landscape. Golfing landscape had a technique where they would use a foot or so of sand for the putting green.
Mm.
And,
Because it's got so much traffic on it.
takes a lot of traffic, and the sand has natural aeration pockets.
Mm.
And the water drains through the sand quite well, and as the water drains through the sand, it pulls in oxygen as it vacates the surface.
Mm. So is that what's under the lawn there?
That's what's under the tea garden lawn in the back
Of the
wedding
Lion House?
area.
Hmm.
That was a hilarious thing that caused me some consternation because we couldn't get the people off the lawn, and I felt like we were directing the activities of a herd of cattle who were destroying the lawn, and so I decided to take out all of the grass and take out all of the soil that supported the grass and replace it with a foot of sand. And then I had an executive call me and say, "Peter, get that sand out of there." And I said to him,
Now, is he a gardener?
"No."
Okay, just an executive.
He was an
Okay.
executive over the Lion House. And I said, "You wash dishes and I'll pick up cigarette butts." And I shortly got a call from a little higher authority that was quite frightening. He asked me what I was doing, and I said I was doing my job. And he said, "Well, I think you better just change that and take out the sand." And I said, "Your job is to hire and fire. You hire somebody to take care of the gardens. You fire them if it doesn't work. And it's a quiet moment on the phone, and he said, well, we'll be watching you, and if you can't produce a lawn there, we may have to release you with appreciation before you want to go.
And you went on several more years, so apparently
I went
worked.
on another 20, 30 years.
I want to come back to something you mentioned. You mentioned the Japanese, and then the spirit of, what was it? The spirit of...
Genus loci, the spirit of place, yeah.
Is that, I don't know how to pronounce it, feng shui? Is that the same
Yeah,
kind
that's
of principle?
Chinese. It is feng shui, and I had a marvelous blessing. I was called on a mission to Japan, and part of the process of serving a mission is to be interviewed by the various authorities that come through. And I was being interviewed at the end of my mission or near the end of my mission, by Gordon B. Hinckley, who was a assistant to the 12. And I pointed out to him that I had been faithfully paying attention to mission work and had never photographed a Japanese garden, had never spent any time looking at Japanese gardens. And I felt that it would be a great opportunity for me at the end of my mission to not go home yet, but to spend some time studying Japanese floral design and Japanese garden design. And he said that he would have to get permission from the First Presidency. Well, I had worked on Temple Square 2 or 3 years before I went on the mission, so the brethren knew who I was. And surprise, surprise, Brother Hinckley wrote back and said, the First Presidency have approved your request to stay and study. And so at the end of my mission, I moved out of my mission quarters and found some separate quarters so that I wouldn't interfere with the mission work. And then I studied Ikebana, which is the arranging of flowers, and toured all the famous gardens in Kyoto. There was a wonderful man named Sato, who he was my age, and he accompanied me, and it was a great opportunity to study Japanese gardens. And I found that I could apply the peninsula and bay type of philosophy of Japanese stone arrangements. I could just as well do that with flowers. And so we did it, and then trained the players, the workers, the employees, plus the various housewives who decided to come in and help us. And we trained them in February. We called it the February Design Course. And it was very important because when I first went on to Temple Square in 1972 as the supervisor, only one person did the design.
Really?
And that was the supervisor. And I felt that wouldn't work for very long because we were about to expand. And we expanded from 22,000 flowers planted in spring and in fall to 165,000 flowers.
Wow.
A 7-fold increase, and without adding staff, paid staff. And it was through these marvelous volunteer women who succeeded and did well in the design course. And if they succeeded in the design course, then they would be given a specific area for them to design and to execute and to weed.
I'll bet you a lot of people are wondering right now, how do I learn to do gardens like they have in Temple Square? Now, you have these design classes. You're going to have some people that just by nature can do it. They just right off the bat, they're creative, they have an eye for design. But are there those who struggle with it? And if they do struggle, can they learn?
There are those who struggle, and I remember Helmut was a perfect example. He was an employee, a wonderful German bricklayer, And his thought processes were one brick on another.
Yeah.
And that also included putting one lollipop on the right side and one lollipop on the left side, and
Very symmetrical.
very symmetrical. I called them duck pins and bowling balls across the front of the house. And so the question is, can these people learn? And I, without exception, people can learn. It's in their DNA. People respond to loveliness. And go ahead.
Helmut had a fabulous breakthrough one day, and we all stood and wept because it was kind of a miracle, and he knew he'd gotten it.
It's true.
And so I've seen it time and time again. Even people who just come through Temple Square have an aha experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true.
Can you tell us a little bit about his breakthrough?
Well, the breakthrough was common for anyone who stayed long enough. I remember Esther took the design course, even though she was with a master's degree. Mm-hmm. She wanted to submit herself to a design course as anybody else. One of the things I learned in design at Utah State University was that you had to speak rather honestly about the quality of the design, and so as not to hurt people's feelings. We decided to put the names of various flowers in a hat on the first day of design course, have people pull a name out of the hat. It could be rosemary, it could be thyme, parsley, sage. Mm-hmm. It could be roses, violets, anything. And then they were to sign their works with that name, so that no one knew that name except them.
Wow.
And so then you would critique the work. I remember we had a marvelous designer named Roseanne Peterson, and she came in. She was a professional artist and really knew her stuff, and I remember evaluating her first assignment. I looked at it from this angle and that angle and the next angle and the next angle, then overhead rotated it back and forth. And I said, this person ought to be teaching this class, not me.
Really?
And in the case of quality work, they would have to sign the flower name that we gave them. But also, if it was particularly good work, we wanted everybody else in the class to know who was doing good work. So I said, who did this? And she raised her hand, and then we asked her to help critique the work of other people as the class went on. Mm. Well, poor Helmut took the class for 3 or 5 years, always putting one brick on another and one lollipop to the right and one lollipop to the left. And it was like drowning. It was like watching him drown. Mm-hmm. He couldn't get onto it. But eventually he surrendered himself to the genus loci of the assignment and did a spectacular job. And so I said, this is spectacular. Who did this? And poor Helmut turned bright red and with tears in his eyes raised his hands. Wow. And we knew he had crossed the divide. And from that time on, we could give him important assignments and trust that he would produce a landscape design that would follow the character of the patterns that we wanted. The character of the patterns we were looking for was designs that called attention to the creator, not the designer. Mm.
That's a nice way to look at it. You talked about looking at things from different angles.
Well, gardens are like walk-through sculpture.
Yeah.
And because they're walk-through sculpture, you have an experience going this way through the composition, or you have an experience of turning around going that way.
So how do you go about, let's take one space in Temple Square. How do you go about planting that so that it looks good from either side, no matter where you're standing? It looks good. How do you go about doing that?
You create it while you're walking, and what you do is you take the controlling elements, a dominant color or a dominant form or a dominant texture, and those controlling elements we found in most successful gardens added up to about 10 to 20% of the total mass. And you always estimated your flowers by how many square feet you had. That's easy to do. If I have 100 square feet, I automatically know that I'm going to plant 200 plants or 2 plants per square foot.
Mm-hmm.
And I automatically know out of that 200 plants, I know that 10 to 20%, which is 20 to 40 plants, will be these dominant plants, outstanding color or something like that. We called that the skeleton. And then the connecting forms were also 10 to 20%, and we call that tendon. And then the fill-in was 60 to 40%, depending on how much skeleton and how much tendon you put down. The rest would be 40 to 60% flesh. Skeleton, tendon, flesh, which was produced, the idea was produced by the great Bauhaus painter, Paul Klee. And he conceived of the idea that all design could be reduced to skeleton, tendon, flesh. And so that answers your question. How did you go about doing it? We created skeletons that could be viewed beautifully from left side or the right side or front or back or
The eighth
overhead.
floor of a building.
8th floor of a building. We have a number of tall buildings. People have a right to expect beautiful gardens no matter how you look at them.
So the next question comes. You've planted skeleton, tendon, flesh, say 1st of April. Some of those flowers are dying out by the middle of May. And so if your skeleton's dying out in the middle of May, but the others are still going, how do you keep those flower beds going and looking full? And
It's interesting. I think the most important thing to remember is that neighboring plants that are healthy are perfectly willing to occupy the vacancy left by a sick plant.
Which is why we don't spell out LDS in
In
our
the flower bed.
beds, because then the gaps, the missing plants always show. But when you plant skeleton, tendon, flesh, it just blends in and recovers.
like a pest could kill one plant that doesn't affect the others.
You're right on target.
Which is why you want biodiversity. The more plants, the more species, the bigger success you're going to have.
We're sitting at a table that is probably 4 by 6 feet. And that 4 by 6 feet table would be filled with about 30 varieties of plants.
Wow.
If you were the devil's advocate and say, well, Peter, how can you put 30 to 60 plants in a small space like this table? And the way you do it is by choosing unifying qualities, let's say we do it all in red, but we do it in 30 to 60 types of red flowers. So the unifying factor
is red.
Is red, or a common form or a common texture. But the diversity gives us the opportunity to lay out a flower bed that can tolerate losses. And those losses here on Temple Square have come from dogs running through the flowers, tobacco budworm going through and destroying 20% of the flowers, and the plants that were left would fill in the vacancies just fine. Thank you very much.
Wow. That's interesting. You know, I walk around and look at these flower beds and these arrangements and so on. over between the old administration building and the church office building, there is I don't know what you would call it, there's an area there that structurally it's very symmetrical.
Yes.
But the flower arrangements in there are not.
Oh, you're so observation. You have a good observation. That's right. We called that the administration parterre. It was like a French decoration in an open space. Mm-hmm. The parterre had some complications talking about the genus loci. We have a tall building on the east side of the garden, a 4-story building on the east side of that garden. And
very classic building, the columns, the ionic.
Yes, the administration building. And then the old Hotel Utah was about 10 stories high, so twice as tall. And the play of those solid shadows through the day as the sun rotated through the sky added up to we would photograph, we would take somebody who was diligent and say, Bob, we'd like you to go spend 12 hours working for us this coming Saturday. Would you be willing to do that? Yes. All I want you to do is to photograph straight down from this building every hour on the hour, so we end up with 12 photographs that identify the shadow patterns for that hour. And then we would take those shadow patterns and draw them on transparent paper to come up with a composite sunshade study. And from the composite sunshade study, we suddenly found out why petunias would not grow in one side and why begonias would grow in the other side. The petunias only got, 5 hours of sunlight in the entire day. After that, we realized with 5 hours of sunlight, we could plant begonias and impatiens, but we couldn't plant petunias. So shadow studies were part of searching for the genus loci of the place.
Which is something people at home should do. You don't think about watching all day and see where the shadows are, where the sun is.
You could do it like Gertrude Jekyll, the great English gardener. She would say things like, if it doesn't perform, hoik it out and put something else in there. But the problem is at a huge scale, when you've got 165,000 flowers plant, you can't hoik out even half of them to replace them.
So to begin with, you do something called sacrifice planting.
Exactly.
And side by side, you plant something that takes 2 hours of sun, 5 hours of sun, 8 hours of sun, and let them decide.
It's true.
And then you
let them fight it out.
You save your manpower, because that is the greatest cost in a garden, not the flowers, but the manpower to pull the weeds.
We actually found that the manpower added up to 75% of the cost of the garden. And the lawnmower and the sprinkler systems and the cultivation, that only cost, even though you'd once every 10 years spend money for a $20,000 lawnmower, it would pay for itself anyway, because manpower is the most expensive part of the garden. It's expensive. The flowers are expensive. Buying the flowers, buying the seed, planting the seed, and getting lawnmowers and getting automatic sprinkling systems, hugely expensive. But they all together only add up to 25% of the cost of the garden. The manpower is 75% of the cost of the garden, just like Esther said.
So you have to be willing to experiment and explore and let things fail. And
yes.
And I'm thinking was Plato, I think, that said, in order to create beauty, you
must be willing to explore chaos.
Right, that's what it is. Chaos can be a very frightening place for someone like Helmut
Well, chaos can be a frightening experience for executives who are my supervisors.
Because they see the gardens when they're done.
They also see the chaos I go through to create it.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the older plants or trees or things that are on Temple Square.
Sure.
I understand, I hope it's still there, I understand there was a rose that actually came from Nauvoo.
Esther.
There was. The story is that has pretty good provenance, that it came from Nauvoo in a handcart in a teapot and was planted on Temple Square. And in 1981, when they were going to redo the assembly hall and tear out that garden, Peter took me over there and pointed to that rose and said, we need to move this. So I took it and planted it at the Beehive House. And it's still there. It's a little tiny Chinensis rose. It's
a red one, if I remember.
It's not anything that would knock your socks off, but it's a very sweet story. And they redid the cobble wall a couple of years ago, and I went down there, and the rose was gone. And it had been potted up and stuck in the back alley. So I took some cuttings, and I have them at home growing in my garden in case it ever disappears from
I remember
church
part of the
grounds.
history of that rose. It was actually given to Brother Nelson by a sweet little old lady with the story, and he faithfully planted and preserved the rose until Esther could save it.
I do want to insert one thing about Irvin T. Nelson. He also did the grounds at the Washington, D.C. Temple. But my favorite garden that he did was the Orson Hyde Garden on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And I've been there several times, and every time I go, it's in a state of ruin that's greater than the time before, and which shows how great that garden is, because even in a state of ruin, it's a beautiful place.
And we always say, Elio Saarinen, the great Finnish architect who designed the St. Louis Arch, said that you can always tell the quality of any designed structural element by seeing it in ruins. If it's beautiful in ruins, it's well done. And I applied that to my father-in-law when he was going through dementia. And as he went through dementia, I looked at him one day sitting there as noble as he ever was, and I thought, he looks classic even in ruins. He looks classic.
Well, that's a nice thought. You talked about the rose coming from Nauvoo in a teapot. I understand there was a tree there that came in a purse.
Yes.
Talk about that.
The tree came in the purse of Mrs. Petty, and the Petty family went to the Holy Land.
In 1949.
In 1949, they acquired 2 seedlings of cedars of Lebanon. One was planted at the Petty house, and the other one was planted on Temple Square in its current position. But in its current position, it was next 4 feet away from a house that had been built to receive visitors as they came through a little gate there and showed their recommends. And one terrible winter, the ice slid off the roof and broke the tree in half. And today, if you go there closely and look closely, you'll see the decapitated part looks just like a slit, and a side branch was trained to take over as the leader. And now the tree is beautiful and noble. It was once threatened by construction, and as I looked at the contractor and the architect bent on cutting the tree down, I promised to go to the Salt Lake Tribune newspaper and get them to photograph the little old ladies laying in front of the bulldozers with me. I can't believe how gutsy I was. Needless to say, we were able to save the tree.
Well, Let's talk about some of the other trees that are on the square there. By the temple, there's a tree. I don't know if they call it the wedding tree, but
Yes.
it's where brides often get their
Yes.
picture taken.
The wedding tree is a Lonicera korokoi, the korokoi honeysuckle. And it was spotted by my wife as we were driving along 9th East, and they were growing together next to an old adobe house. And she said,
matched pair of
a
them.
matched pair. And she said, Peter, stop the car. Back up. And I looked at those two trees and I thought, that would look beautiful next to the Salt Lake Temple. So I got Brother Nelson and we drove up there and I said, look at this. He said, how will we ever move them? They were full grown. And I said, I can move them if you can get permission to plant them. So we went into the church records to find out who lived there. And the Updegraff family lived there. And the Updegraff family were active Latter-day Saints. He was serving in the bishopric. And when we found out that he was serving in the bishopric, we knew those trees were ours. And then I took 3 years to prepare them for transplanting, which involved root pruning. And at the end of 3 years, we were able to use cranes to lift them out of their original pioneer planting site, put them on a big truck, and haul them down to Temple Square. It took 2 cranes to place them in place. One crane on the outside of the wall that picked it up and moved it across to the other side of the wall. Then the other crane picked it up and moved it into place. And a lot of people had themselves pictures taken next to that tree. Well, the tornado destroyed the tree on the east, but the tree on the west still exists.
But the tree on the east has crown sprouted up, and it is getting bigger and bigger. The reason those trees are so fabulous there is because the gray granite of the temple, and these trees have gray green leaves and pink blooms, and these wonderful gnarled
Dusty pink blooms.
trunks that are kind of remind people of olive trees. And I've heard
Right.
some of the tour guides called them olives before. And just at conference time in the Deseret News, they had a picture of those trees and called them locusts. So everybody's still kind of confused. They are honeysuckles, but they are
And they are
spectacular
honeysuckle bushes.
honeysuckle bushes.
So they're
that
not really trees.
They grew from pioneer times and just kept on growing and kept
they
on
are-
thickening. And
they're multi-trunked, so they're
Just
very
elegant.
beautiful.
I understand that the watering of Temple Square, does that all come from City Creek?
it does. The water for Temple Square comes through a 4-inch main from City Creek. It's not metered. And what happened was that the city wanted to take over the water that was coming out of City Creek. And City Creek was owned by Brigham Young and hence was owned by the church. When I was hired in 1956, Henry Kagi, in 1956, celebrated his 44th anniversary of working for Temple Square. And he told me that City Creek used to run down the center of North Temple, and that he, Henry Kagi, would dip a bucket into the stream and go over and water the trees that were along the street. And when the opportunity came for us to put a pipe into City Creek, we made an arrangement with the church through formal letters of intent that the church would yield to the city all rights to the water in City Creek if the city would yield to the church unmetered water for Temple Square. And to this day, Temple Square is watered with water that comes from a pipe that's not metered.
I remember hearing the story of there's a great lawn between the Tabernacle and the North Visitor Center.
Yes.
And the North Visitor Center has the doors on the south side that they never use and stairs coming down
Yes.
onto the lawn.
Yes.
Now, I understand there have been some battles over the years to put a sidewalk from the Tabernacle over to those stairs.
Did you say battles?
Yeah.
That was so funny. George Cannon, the church architect who was responsible for the design of the North Visitor Center, took me aside one day. He was aged in his 90s, and he knew me, and he took me up to look at that beautiful set of stairs that steps down to the lawn. And he said, "Peter, those stairs that step down to the lawn are poetic expressions that come to us from Venice. And just as stairs that go down from the plaza to the water were never meant to be bridged by a pavement out over the water, we never intended to have pavement go over to those steps." And so several times I was faced with somebody in authority wanting to put pavement there. I remember the first time it happened, I knew that they were going to put the pavement across there and destroy the simplicity of that lawn. And I put the name of that lawn on the prayer roll in the Salt Lake Temple, that it would be preserved. And they decided that they caught on to what Brother Young was saying, that the steps were never meant to be connected to a pavement. It would destroy the elegant simplicity of that green space on the lawn. A decade later, with a new set of management, the question came up again. Let's put a sidewalk across there. So once again, I put his name in the prayer roll of the Salt Lake Temple. And a witness to that event watched the brethren deal with the business of the church. Brother Hinckley was the voice for the brethren. And he said, "Next, we have a request to put pavement across the lawn over to the North Visitor Center Plaza. Let's see. We already considered that. Next." And that was
it.
That was how it was saved. President Hinckley
remembered it 10 years earlier.
From 10 years before that had been debated. And he said, "We already considered that. Next."
Wow. What are some of your let's take each of you. What are some of your favorite things on Temple Square? Favorite plants, favorite trees, favorite areas?
Well, I would have to say that my favorite was the Cedar of Lebanon, because I was willing to sacrifice in my employment. And another thing that I guess the other favorite thing is that we saved a significant number of trees. On the south side of the temple, there are some large chestnuts that are decorated with lights. There are some large elms that run along the west end of that thing. And the architect had drawn a plan that would remove those trees and put out a fine and noble plaza. And I knew that those trees were doomed unless I did something. And I conceived of the idea of protecting that lawn because we wanted to be able to have access to the south side of the temple in case it caught on fire. And so when all of my management had gone home for the weekend, I arranged to have the Salt Lake City Fire Department bring their giant fire truck with a steering wheel on the back wheels, drive onto Temple Square at 7 in the morning, Saturday morning, when almost nobody was there. And they drove across the lawn up to the south side of the temple and extended the ladder from the truck over to the second floor. And we took pictures of it driving across the lawn and took pictures of it extending the ladder over to the south side of the Salt Lake Temple, the south windows there. And then we had risk management write a letter to the architect asking us not to change the lawn there so that we could rescue people from the temple if it caught on fire. And to save those mighty trees in one fell swoop was a sense of joy for me, a feeling of accomplishment. The other thing that was a sense of joy was to get the idea of having a design class so that more than one person, we ended up with 50 people designing the flower beds, but think that 50 like-minded people could produce arrangements that called attention to the creator, not the designer, was a source of great satisfaction. And Esther worked with me for 20 years with that design class. We just had a wonderful time.
So Esther, what are some of your favorite things?
Well, some spaces that still move me are starting on Temple Square, the South Mall, the center mall that runs down the center of Temple Square, the South Mall, the elm trees that enclose it make it like a cathedral, and the dappled shade and the yew hedges that surround it. It's one of the great urban spaces in the USA, and it's very underrated. As you look to the north, it is terminated. Well, it's on either side is the temple and the tabernacle, which are two of our great buildings. And as you go off to the vista, it is terminated by the conference center. And the south vista used to be terminated by a bookstore at Crossroads Plaza. And now that they have torn that down, and I'm excited to see if they're going to open up that vista to the south, to the sky. Another space that still thrills me is the space between the administration building and the Lion House. It's a very tight corridor, and on the one side are the cadence of the Greek columns, and on the other side is the cadence of the dormers and the doors of the Lion House, and it's a wonderful space. The other space that I love is sometimes I drive up State Street just to drive under the Eagle Gate Monument, because there you have a real sense of space and a real sense of place.
There's a cobblestone
wall. The cobblestone wall, the view to the Capitol, but you drive under that arch and you really feel like you've come to Salt Lake. I don't know if I'm sure that a lot of people don't know that a couple of years ago, South Temple was named one of the 10 greatest streets in the U.S., along with the Magnificent Mile in Chicago, Canyon Road in Santa Fe. But one of the things that makes South Temple great is the Avenues grid is smaller blocks than the 10-acre grid to the south. So that's interesting. The trees, the architecture, Temple Square, Eagle Gate. It terminates on the east at the University of Utah and at the south at the Union Pacific Railroad. And it's a fabulous street.
It is. Yeah.
And the other garden that Peter talked about was the administration parterre. And back in 1983, when the Hotel Utah was redone to become the Joseph Smith building, that that garden was torn up to build parking construction underneath. And Peter and I met with the architects, FFK, are fabulous men. And I'm particularly thinking of Joe Rubin. And they showed us a plan for a stone plaza with benches that was going to replace that garden. Mm. And Peter and I gulped, and we
let me interject one thing
met with
here.
them.
That garden was created by Hare and Hare Landscape Architects out of Kansas City, and it was a true classic that was first championed by George Cannon Young.
So we did a presentation. This was a time that it was that we used history to win.
And Esther was the voice. She really saved the place.
Told them about the history of plazas and how they had come out of Italy, out of the medieval times. It was a place to meet and shop, and that the plazas that had been built in the 1960s and the 70s had essentially become a home for the homeless, and that what we really had to have there was a garden for people to walk through on their way to someplace else. That was, and they were open, and they gave us back our garden with some modifications.
And Esther had the courage to face them.
Great. That is a beautiful spot.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts you want to share about your work or Temple Square?
Well, I think that for both of us, the fact that the place is holy ground never escaped us while we were working there.
Thank you. We've been visiting today with Peter Lassig and Esther Truitt Henrichsen discussing the history of the gardens at Temple Square. I'm Matt Henderson.